Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello, everyone. So we are finally getting to the second part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers. And today we actually have a guest with us. So I'm going to have her introduce herself. Justine, go ahead.
Hello. I love how you called it "And the Two Towers" like it was a Harry Potter movie.
Yeah, my soul cringed a little bit when that happened. I was
Listen, I'm doing my absolute best, guys. I loved it.
I loved it. Hi, I'm Justine Mastin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I'm also a sometimes yoga teacher, podcaster, writer, adjunct professor. I have too many jobs, is what I'm saying. I am best known as the captain of the Starship Therapise, which is both a book and a podcast. If you're interested in the book, it's Starship Therapise, using therapeutic fanfiction to rewrite your life, available wherever books are sold. Yes, a real publishing house did put that book out. And I have a new book coming out called The Grieving Therapist, Caring for Yourself and Your Clients When It Feels Like the End of the World. And that'll be available for pre-sale in the next couple of months. Oh, and I'm stoked to talk about Lord of the Rings. This is very close to my heart.
I'm stoked here. This is the first I've heard about this other book you've written. I require it immediately.
Yes,
agreed. Same.
It is full of harsh truths and whimsy, which is like a description of me as a person. And I wrote both those books with my collaborator, Larissa Garsky.
Yeah, and she was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately couldn't make it, but she's with us in spirit through you.
And a fellow Chicagoan.
She is a fellow Chicagoan. You could see her.
Yeah, she is still of this earth. Even though
she's still earthbound. Yeah, she's still part of the terrestrial plane.
Well, I mean, Chicagoans think that Chicago is the earth, the whole earth, the total earth, and that everyone here is on earth and everyone not is somewhere else. Because we forget that we are not, in fact, as cool as New York, but we think we are. We think we're cooler.
I was just there in New York Comic-Con.
Oh, yeah. You're a big-time panelist on a lot of cons.
Yeah, I'm like a big-time celebrity for a very small niche group of people.
Oh, yeah. We love it. So the themes of today, we're going to be talking about grief, individuation. Oof, I'm going to stumble over that a few times. And then the character of Gollum / Smeagol, we're just going to be covering a few things in regards to him, such as integrated family systems, dissociation, and a little discussion about addictive personality situations. So, and then as always, we're going to have treatment and final thoughts. So as I'm sure anyone who's listened to our previous episode on the first part of Lord of the Rings, you will know that I am the weakest link in terms of this fandom, in that it's a blind spot for me. So that being said, I'm going to throw it to Ben to explain what this movie is about, even though I literally just watched it.
And it's 90 years old, but that's okay. I'll be happy to summarize the plot here. So in The Two Towers, what happens is this story picks up right after the conclusion of the Fellowship of the Ring, where the Fellowship has broken up, Boromir has died, murdered by Uruk-hai, and we see each of our groups split apart on their separate versions of the quest to destroy the ring. Frodo and Sam have taken off towards Mordor. Merry and Pippin have gotten kidnapped by Uruk-hai, and we see Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn off to rescue them. And then they split apart even further, even though once they rescue Merry and Pippin get lost and find an Ent who helps them to try to get to safety before they convince the Ents that the Ents need to actually go to war because the fires of Isengard and the machination of war is becoming relevant to them, and they can't just hide in their forest and take their time and wait everything out like they always do. And then we see Frodo and Sam encounter Gollum, who promises to take them to Mordor. And right as Frodo is showing compassion, allowing Gollum to assume his regular identity as Smeagol for the first time in quite a long time, Faramir, dealing with his own shit, comes in and forces Frodo to betray Gollum, which means that Smeagol and Gollum comes back out, leading Smeagol and Gollum to betray Frodo and Sam yet again. And we see this constant cycle of push and pull, and we see so much work done for each one of these members of the subgroups to start separating out from their previous identities, from their home races, their home countries, their homelands, to realize that they have to be their own people to solve these problems. And this film culminates with the Battle of Helm's Deep, where we see the people of Rohan and King Theoden recognize that doing things the way they always had works to some degree, but can also betray you by trapping you in a predictable pattern. And I think that is such an important thing that can tie into why in this episode we'll talk about individuation / differentiation as a huge part of human development, because at some point the world you grow up in is not the same one your parents trained you for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this movie kind of starts with our first topic, which is grief. You know, it quite literally recaps the death of Gandalf, and then Frodo having a grief-stricken nightmare that he wakes up from, and experiencing our capital G Gandalf's death.
Yeah, Gandalf as working in as the deity figure that comes in and out of the story, providing guidance and magic to help solve the problems in ways that can't be understood or done by our more earthly races.
Mm-hmm.
Wizards are sort of like angels in Tolkien mythology.
Okay.
That's why they're dicks sometimes. If you're in the supernatural fandom, often angels are dicks.
Well, there's good angels and bad angels, like everything else, not just one thing, a monolith, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, where do you all see grief, other than this like outright example of how the movie starts? Where does grief represented for you all in this movie?
Oh, I mean, it's all over town. Aragorn is grieving for what he believes is the loss of his relationship with Arwen, and the poor hobbitses are all grieving for the loss of their fellows. And the big thing that kind of just like hit me in the face watching it this time, all 4 hours, just a little bit ago, was Merry and Pippin specifically, their grief around the loss of the forests, the loss of their earth, the eco grief. And the fact that, hey, if we don't do something, we're going to lose the Shire too. We can't say, oh, well, you know, like people in the world today that are like, well, you know, it's fine. I'll be okay because I live in the Midwest. And so I'm not going to burn as the global temperature rises. Like, well, but we all need to give a shit because we all live on this pale blue dot. I thought that was really beautifully done and like so ahead of its time, obviously. And, you know, Tolkien ahead of its time, but also like this movie came out in 2002, which we were not having quite the conversations then that we are now. And Treebeard is just this beautiful personification of the shepherd of the forest. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, I want to save your friends. You knew them from Nut and Acorn. Let's save them.
That's hard to get me. I mean, I think this movie's talking about, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, that there is sort of this very concrete idea of grief, and in the mainstream of that, grief is someone dies or you lose someone and you grieve for them. But I think what you're talking about, and what I also noticed in this movie, outside of the grief of Gandalf, is the grief of more like conceptual grief, or more abstract grief,
or ambiguous loss.
And I think where I kind of noticed it when you brought up like Merry and Pippin was the grief of sort of growing up too, and the grief of like tragedy, and that things aren't ever going to be the way they were before, and the profound grief that can come from realizing that, when, oh my God, I do not know who is who. Which one is Dominic Monaghan, Merry or Pippin?
Dominic Monaghan is
the
Mary.
blonde or the brunette? Who's the blonde?
Dominic Monaghan is Mary.
Okay, when Mary was like talking and he was like, we got to fight, and Pippin was like, nah, man, we'll just go back to the Shire. That exchange I think I said out loud right before Mary said it was like, there isn't going to be a Shire anymore. And so this idea that you can't go home again, that you have to grieve the life. Or I think I saw the grief on his face of like, the life you knew before is gone. And hopefully we can get some version of it back again. But right now there's no settling into that life and staying in that life anymore. It is done. And there's such profound grief with moving forward in your life, from one stage of life to the next, which is what we're seeing here too. Like, they once were happy little hobbits, and now they are they're warriors in this huge battle that is so much bigger than them. And there's so much grief with that. And I know from what very, very little I know about Tolkien, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like a lot of inspiration from this was from him going to war, right? In World War I, and witnessing his peer group go through that. And so I'm sure this was a huge inspiration of that, of like these young people and kind of the light in their eyes going away and the grief of that.
Well, it's that you can absolutely true. Tolkien himself was a soldier in World War I in the trenches, and most of his company did not return. And you can feel the World War I politics at play throughout both The Hobbit, especially The Hobbit, but this movie as well, this story as well. And in it, you see the particular clash of World War I was the isolationism of so many world powers, as evil is coming. Evil is coming, and war is coming to your door, whether you like it or not. And it is affecting everyone. And we see that theme playing out with Theoden, who's refusing to help Gondor. And we see Pippin, who just wants to go back to the Shire and pretend like, oh, this isn't happening, because in his head, if we retreat back to the Shire, like, no one's going to notice that the Shire is here. And although these movies don't show it in the book, there is an absolute burning of the Shire, where even hobbits turn on hobbits and join the orcs and burn the Shire. And you see this theme reckoned with over and over throughout the movie, as each player has to recognize they have to grieve the loss of the life and the reality that they thought they once had, in order to accept that all of their resources that apply to the world they thought existed no longer apply, and that they must let go in order to accept the new reality and form new strategies to survive, because the old ones will not work.
You know what's interesting, Ben, when you were talking, something kind of clicked into place for me that I hadn't thought about before. Because one of the big relational shifts that happened during World War I was that social stratification barriers just kind of tumbled as everybody was in the pits together. You know, it didn't matter if you were the president of a bank or a person without a home. Like, you were fighting for your country, and suddenly you were all, all of that social shit came tumbling down. And I'm thinking about, obviously, all these folks are people of status except for the hobbits.
Right.
And Gollum, but suddenly they're all in the same war. And there's some interesting relational dynamics there that I wonder if Tolkien was like, oh, look, all of these people could come together except for women. or
we don't allow any more than one woman per story, or two women's a max.
two, but like they can't talk to each other. Never.
And they have to be absolute smoke shows.
Yeah, just like stunning every time.
So we can bring a bunch of slightly different people together.
It's like a titch.
And
just a titch.
just slightly different. And those social barriers can come tumbling down. That gets real fucked up when we go back into the real world. Like those folks that came back from war, it was very confusing for them because it was like me and this president of the bank were in the trenches together. But now he's the president of the bank and I'm, this unhoused dude and I'm not supposed to talk to him anymore, which Brittany gets to your idea of like growing up and changing and such rich relationships. You brought a structural and relational thinker in, and these are the thoughts I'm having.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, which is good, and it's so powerful to watch, especially the scenes in this one where you see not only those types of relationships where people of all different social stratification must form bonds in order to survive, but also the reality that people you thought were good or neutral will join sides with evil. That they're and the parade of evil men marching into Mordor is
yes, the men from the east and the south. Not a great look.
Not a great look at all.
Oh,
yeah. Tolkien was pretty racist as well as being misogynist. Sorry.
What a surprise. What a surprise of a writer, a white male writer of that time period.
Well, and also think about just psychodynamically what's playing out for him is in his war, that's exactly who he fought. England is west of Germany and north of the Ottoman Empire. So that makes sense.
Yep. If you really break it down, and he swore it wasn't. He's like, "There's nothing allegorical in here. I don't know what you're talking about."
That speaks to a fair amount of lack of insight, if I ever heard it.
Yes.
Such a lack of insight.
You mean if I create art, part of me will be in that art? You don't say. That is something a client would say, and I'd be like, "Hey, girl, sorry to break this to you, but." Ooh, I'm noticing some things, whether you mean to or not.
Right. I mean, you have to remember this, a stoic Englishman from would definitely think exactly that no, this is just a work of my brain and my creativity and my research of Norse cultures and Saxon cultures and how they intersect. And you go like,
oh,
dude, I was in high school and I wrote a paper about how this is a World War I allegory and found hundreds of journal articles, even contradicting your own quotes, and psychologists going like, yeah, nah, bro. In short.
Oh my God. Stepping into what you were saying about like eco grief, just going back to that, Justine, like I also felt it because we're finally socially starting to, in a general way, starting to talk about climate change and the planet. So you're right. Like it was kind of, in watching this movie that's 20 years old based on a book that's a bajillion years old, it was striking. And I really noticed a lot of the themes that it's only the second time I've watched this movie. So it's not like I've watched this so many times and never noticed it.
I wish I had your mind. I wish this was only the second time I was saying.
But I did write Artworks, the Industrial Complex Ruining Nature for Progress. And wow, what a thought to have in a book written by, as we just talked about, a man from like 1910s. Because so much of what they talk about with, there's like a whole speech that Saruman, I think that's his name, says in the beginning, where he's like, we're going to rip this stuff down and we're going to build it up. And it's never going to be the same like it was before. And then also finding disenfranchised men and making them part of his group and then having them attack their own people. I was like, I think I even wrote incels in my notes. I was like, it's like got incel stuff. It's got climate changey kind of stuff. It's got industry, capitalism. I was like, geez Louise. I mean, I know I'm viewing it through this specific lens, but it felt very timely. And and like the true grief of that when things change, when we quote unquote progress societally, there's also something we greatly lose. And culturally, we've been moving at such a rapid clip that I think we're now allowing ourselves to realize the true sacrifice of that. And I see that in this movie too.
You do. And you see it all over, and remembering like what makes something timeless is that the same theme can be applicable to any time period, and that the same degree of human inner conflict can be told through metaphor and still be relevant now. And that's why I think these books, among all the other great fantasy that's ever been written, have stood such a strong test of time, and why these movies were so hotly anticipated and became such a huge part of the cultural zeitgeist is because of how powerful all these metaphors are continually, because of that loss you're talking about. Every time there's progress, something old is lost. And for Tolkien, it's having lived through the Industrial Revolution to see, of course, men develop a better way to kill each other, because unfortunately that's always driven industry, is better ways to kill each other. And for World War I, we're talking the development of better explosives, airplanes, machine guns, and gas. And watching the way death was distributed in ways never seen before. Wars prior to this, guys lined up in lines with guns that don't shoot accurately at all and stood and kneeled behind each other, hoping they didn't get hit with musket balls.
Well, that's what we saw in this movie. People just kind of going towards each other, which is such a gnarly idea.
Right. You want to just charge straight into the face of a spear. No thanks. But that's what heroism was considered. And you see people having to grieve the idea that people would come back from war. And now they don't. I mean, not everyone did, of course, always. But this starts to translate the timelessness of human evolution, because human beings are always finding better ways to do things. But the military industrial complex still is part of that. And that's an evil that must be dealt with. And seeing the impact that has on nature becomes part of the eco-grief of this story, and why Treebeard and the other Ents are so relevant.
Yeah, and they have their own thing, like we talked about in the beginning, where they're like, this isn't our battle. And them having to realize that this is coming for us. And I think the shame of it is, in the whole concept of like eco-grief and how we're recognizing it now, unfortunately, is that you don't really understand it's happening until it's at your front door. And with the situation with Treebeard is he's taking the hobbits home, as he thinks, or taking them back south or whatever. And he sees that like they've already killed some of his friends, and it's right there. And so him and the other Ents can no longer ignore what's happening. And they're doing the thing which happens often, which is I'm not really taking it seriously, or that I have a role in it, until there's already been death and destruction and personal pain.
Absolutely, which we see over and over again in our country in general, of until it is, at my doorstep, it doesn't apply to me. And unfortunately, that is a part of how we got where we are currently, and also how they end up in the same place, where this isn't something where Treebeard is just taking them back. And it's also really interesting because a part of what changes that is Merry and Pippin deciding and knowing that now we have to do something different, and we're going to go and we're going to fight, because now we know, we have like that acceptance that you and Justine were talking about, that acceptance of no one is safe. Right. And then when they show up, and it's that example of him already having to deal with the grief immediately of something, not something that's coming, but something that's already happened. And I love when he makes the call to the other Ents, and his call of like outrage.
Yeah.
And the scene with Isengard is one of my favorite fight scenes, probably in the whole series, because in our world, the trees can't do anything.
Yeah.
The trees can't change anything. They just have to take it. And so watching them try to save themselves in this impossible experience, I think, again, Ben, when you were saying that how this movie applies over and over and over again, I have cried at that scene the first time I watched that scene, and the millionth time I've watched that scene. and how I think it is a really good pinnacle of grief in terms of experiencing what it's happening in front of you and then having to make a decision if you're going to do something about it or if you can do something about it in the moment because it's happening, and then having to live on with your life after you've experienced this and then, you know, having to figure out what we're going to do next.
Yeah. And calling on supports too, which he does right away, which he has the beauty of community, which is that I know instantly when I'm going through this deep sorrow and shock that I can bellow aloud, and my fellow tree shepherds, whatever, ents will come to me, and they will, and we all are going to be on the exact same page at the exact same time. And what a lovely idea that when you're in the throes of grief, there's so much certainty of who you can call on, and there's so much trust and certainty that they will immediately present themselves and be available to you. And you're not going to waste any time explaining why they should take it seriously or why this is a big deal. Everyone's on board 100%. And it is beautiful that that can occur. And it's a shame that we don't have that more often. There's so much time that gets arguably wasted by having to explain and convince people of why something that's going on is tragic and important, and then what to do next. And that's time that's lost, and also emotional labor on the part of the person trying to or make other people realize what's going on.
Yeah. And that brings up stages of grief stuff, which, I mean, we could debate about Kubler-Ross all day.
Which we have, yes.
But I think there's some interesting, if we just want to take that paradigm, I like that paradigm because it's very narrative. If we think about the hero's journey, there's the call to adventure, and then there's the rejection of the call. And then, you know, so we're kind of like moving through this circular paradigm. And we see folks going through different stages of grief as they're discovering that there is war, or that this world is changing, or that this world is ending. And the Ents, before they feel it themselves, they're in denial. Get this away from me. This isn't mine. Go away. And then they go right into anger, which is what we needed in that moment. Yes. We needed that tree that was going to get caught on fire and then just stick his head in the roaring water to put himself out. That's what we needed in that moment.
Which is amazing. And that even as you guys are talking about this, another like angle of the timelessness of this occurred to me is not only do we get to see people moving through these stages of grief and deal with it in real time, which is how life happens.
Right.
Like oftentimes, other than like the death of a family member or a loved one, where sometimes we get kind of stuck in a bit of suspended animation in the world, if we're fortunate enough, gives us some space to do that, is life continues to evolve around you immediately. It does not stop because you had a loss. Everyone else and everything else continue. And for this story, I think what's amazing about it is, in addition to all of that, we also see the stark warning that our world needs, and that those who are constantly pursuing too much from nature need to also grieve their hopes, dreams, and aspirations, if you will, because if you push nature too far, it will be nature itself that reclaims. And that's exactly what's happening with people where like, oh, the water levels are rising and storms are increasing. It's like the Ents are going to war. I don't know why you don't see it.
These hurricanes are getting crazy. The wildfires. It's like, yeah, bitches. Like, Mother Nature's like, I've had enough.
The Ents will go to war. And in addition to that, I think the most stark conversation on grief and guilt that I saw in this happened telepathically between Elrond and Galadriel, where they recognize that the time of the elves is ending. The light of their star that gives them their ability to be immortal and have influence over the world and be supreme beings is gone. It is time for them to go. And they have to accept that as having that social responsibility, it's irresponsible for them, A, to leave without helping, and they send a detachment to help the people at Helm's Deep, and they certainly would have died without the elves' help. but also
Absolutely.
They would not have made it to dawn on the 5th day.
they would not have.
Yeah, the elves definitely felt like, no offense to them, but I guess offense, like the elitist class who is like, we're all set up though, and we're like hot and we live like a long time and we've got like dope ass palaces and transportation. So babe, let's just like get out of here. Let's take that rocket ship right to Mars, like all of the billionaires are doing right now. And
I love how you're interpreting this. Like the elves are Elon Musk and fucking Jeff Bezos.
I want to give them more credit than that, which is why I gave that caveat. But that was the energy of like, we're above all this and we've got resources. So why are we going to get involved in all this muddy lower class business? And Arwen's like that rich daughter who's like, I'm going to be different. I get the struggle of the working man because I fell in love with one and I'm going to go down dad and you can't stop me.
But he's not really a working man because he's this.
He's also a king, but in her brain, you know.
And he has a ring. He has a ring.
Yeah. And so, but it's definitely that kind of relationship or that example. And you're right. It took someone who Elrond views as an authority to say, bitch, you're part of this too. You can't just fuck off to Mars with your family or go into your little like bunker. We are part of this too. It's class solidarity, y'all. It's what we all got to get our arms around. Class solidarity.
Right.
Anyway.
Well,
Leverage your privilege, elves.
Yes.
which they have to do.
Yeah.
But you also see them acknowledge the cost of what they're putting Frodo through.
Mm-hmm.
That Galadriel says to him, like, you know what I know, and what Frodo is likely soon realizing now is that this quest will consume him.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ben.
I was just saying, can we ethically abandon them?
Yeah, and it made me think of, that's what I thought you were talking about when you said the grief of them both acknowledging, and you kind of see it on their face that they clearly have known all this time, and also their realization of Frodo is not going to make it through this. And we knew that when he stood up at the meeting that he wasn't going to be able to live through this. And it's so interesting because they both have relationships with other people, right? So it's also interesting that they never say that to anyone or never. And I guess, and in some ways, it probably doesn't make sense because if they told him or told anyone, then they wouldn't be able to hold any hope throughout the war.
They wouldn't. I mean, and people are watching the elves leave. That's a scene that got cut from Fellowship, is the passing of the elves. You see them leaving.
You all watched the extended edition of both of these, right?
I mean, I have many, many, many times.
Yeah, I have. I didn't watch it for this because I knew that Brittany wouldn't be watching the extended version. So
how come you didn't watch the extended version?
Because the regular version is 3 hours long to the minute. Okay.
It is 1 minute short, actually, for the record.
Well, I felt the extra minute that it
okay.
didn't have.
Can I just step aside for 1 second? But even if you don't love these, Brittany, it is worth the extended edition because what they cut out is like people speaking in exposition, and it's hilarious. Like someone will show up and be like, so here's what's happening to this other person. So like, if you don't follow Tolkien that well, literally people are showing up and they're saying like, okay, so King Theoden is under the spell of...
So it's like dummy edition. This is like 2 Towers for Dummies. It's the extended edition. I'll say this out aloud on the podcast is, Hannah, for you, maybe over the holidays, I'll watch the extended editions, but only if we can make some sort of drinking game out of it.
Ooh, I would highly recommend, this is something that I've done with folks before, is you watch all the extended editions in one day and you make it a full hobbity experience. You have first breakfast, second breakfast, 11sies. Like you got all the food, you got all the drinks. By the time you get to Shelob, you're
barfing.
I'm just
potatoes.
I will say what I do know is they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, and the song that came out of that. So when he said that, I was like, I know that reference.
What do your elf eyes see? Like, damn it, Aragorn. You talk that way to your boyfriend?
Well, is there anything else you want to say about grief before we move on to individuation?
One more thing I would like to say about grief. I have used this a lot with clients. We give the ring a lot of qualities as therapists. I've used difficult relationship with chemicals as the ring, the burden that we're carrying. You can use like anything for that burden, but I've used grief as that burden. So, the carrying of the ring is the person who is really holding the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And Brittany, to your point about having community, I mean, you got to have your Samwise.
Yeah.
And you might inadvertently hurt your Samwise because you're in the throes of the grief taking hold of you. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have that Samwise, then you can become a Gollum.
Yeah.
All alone in a cave for 500 years, just you and your grief.
Mm.
So having a fellowship is so important, and taking walks, getting some exercise, having some elven bread.
Yeah, skipping around, frolicking around the greenery, New Zealand, if you will.
I've been there. It's amazing.
Oh, it looks beautiful.
It is amazing and beautiful. And they have signs up for where the things were shot. Aragorn's cliff. There's no cliff. Spoilers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Well, I'm heartbroken.
Sorry.
All right, we'll take a break there. We'll be right back. All right, so we're going to jump into individuation. This isn't really my bread or butter, so I'm going to throw it to you scholarly types on the podcast.
I don't know if I call myself a scholarly type, but I will own being a nerd. But the thing that stuck out to me a lot in this movie is I'm a therapist that really prefers to focus on individual. In my career, I've learned from doing multiple kinds of therapy that really where my bread and butter lies is helping people understand themselves, and that the dynamics of family and other things play into that, but really understanding that at the end of the day, we have to understand ourself and our interpretation of the world and what our skills are in order to survive. And the process of that happening throughout this film is something that's I found really powerful in watching it, as the amount of time spent split away from the parents in this film versus the first one, where you have the parents of Galadriel and Elrond and Gandalf being so involved in the story, and they have to separate from all of them. And even Boromir coming with his, despite that the ring corrupts him, he initially comes with a very fatherly and older brotherly attitude to be a mentor and guide people. And the split from Aragorn too, all of that, you see these hobbits who had all of these mentors who've been through war, who have seen more than just the Shire has to offer, have to all really start figuring out who I am in this world and how can I use my understanding of the world and my skill set and combine them in the unique ways that make me with things that spontaneously occur to me in the moment, and start trusting them as viable and correct solutions. Never mind the powers and things that I can't do. Never mind that I'm 3 foot tall and I'm battling men and orcs who are so much bigger than me and that I have no physical power against them. Okay, but what can I do? And seeing that process of people having to realize everything I've been taught and told is the right way no longer matters or applies. And I have to trust myself that I, as I am, with my skills, my traits, and my knowledge, are enough to survive this world. And I think watching that happen is really powerful as people start rejecting all of these narratives that they're stuck in and have to start writing new ones in order to allow themselves access to their spontaneous, right-brained solution-finding modes that weren't available to them when they're stuck in old thinking that doesn't apply anymore.
Ben, there's a book that I'm going to recommend to you that's literally about individuation in The Hobbit.
Ooh,
if you haven't read it. Yeah. But I just want to speak to differentiation for a minute. Friends at home, if you're not a therapy nerd, welcome. I don't know how you found this podcast, but if you are a longtime listener, I'm sure you know that there are many different schools of thought and different ways to conceptualize the way that we think about psychology. And differentiation was the idea of Murray Bowen, of Bowenian therapy. And Bowen's concept was similar to what Ben's talking about, but his point was we need to find a way to be separate from our family of origin, the folks who raised us, and still in some way connected. So Bowen was against cutoffs. I'm not saying I agree with that in its entirety. I think sometimes some relationships are too toxic. But the idea that I pull away from it is it can't be either or, it can't be black or white. We can't be 100% enmeshed with our family or 100% cut off from our family because they still live inside of us. We're going to get to that in a little bit. And I think the best example of someone who experiences differentiation through this journey is Sam. Because Sam is very enmeshed with Shire life, and he's very resistant to change Shire life. And he really has to get pulled out of his comfort zone to be able to figure out who he is as more than a gardener, even though that is an aspect of him. But he's becoming all these different identities and all these different aspects of himself, and retaining his love of potatoes and his firm and fervent belief that they will go home and they need some food for the journey back. So he feels like he's done the best job of differentiating to me. He is, in the Bowenian sense, he is both separate and connected to where he came from.
Which is hugely important to Sam's role in this story. Because, like you said before, without Samwise, Frodo becomes Gollum and succumbs to the darkness around him. And the value of differentiation versus pure individuation is that where you separate from everything is you have to retain the parts that have made you who you are and connected to something, so you don't succumb to everything. You must retain a sense of value and values. And Sam represents that in this story, that no matter how much growth he does, where he shows courage and fights and spontaneously defends and does things he never thought he could, he never, ever loses that connection to what makes him him. And Frodo does. Frodo starts to lose that. The ring starts to take that from him.
Yeah, it reminds me of, this is a little tangential, but not too much, of when I do work with clients and I do more like values-based work, and like what feels like your authentic voice and what feel like your authentic values versus what's been projected onto you by your family or the community that you're a part of or the society at large. And how a lot of times in my work and my anecdotal experience is that when we feel the most discomfort and distress is when the values we are trying to align with aren't values that actually come from us, and that we feel the most fulfilled, even if it's really uncomfortable, because it might be antagonistic to parts of our lives, is when we are living more closely aligned with what feels like our authentic values. And I think bridging into what you guys are talking about is that when I do that with clients, and kind of where I think Sam is going too, is that you have to figure out what values, what parts of yourself might have been part of your family as well, but what parts of that don't actually work for you. And there were the parts of you that maybe were trying to conform and fit in with your family, versus the parts of you that you still like about how you were raised and still feel good. And you're right, when I work with people, sometimes there can be very like, throw the baby out with the bathwater, like, fuck this, I'm not going to do anything. Like, and everything that came from this part of my life is trash. Or they go the opposite way, which is kind of what Sam's doing a little bit, especially in the more beginning of this trilogy, is like grabbing onto it so tightly. And it's the need to evolve, and that knowing and trusting me as the clinician, but trusting the process period, that you will feel better. It'll still be hard, but the inner turmoil will be turned down if you can find this middle ground somehow, this well, as we'll talk about in a second, integration between where the values that we're brought up on and the values that feel like they're actually you. And that's really, it's a real like head fuck for some people sometimes, even for myself, to really think about what feels like the parts of me that are good and that I feel proud of, and what parts of me are maybe from my family of origin or something like that, that I'm still clinging to because I don't want change or I'm scared. And it's really, really hard. And I would say to anyone listening, if you want to do this work, it's one of the things that you definitely need to see, I think, a therapist about, because it's impossible to be unbiased and to have perspective on this. Like, you really need a third party guiding you through that, myself included. Therapists go to therapy, most of the time. And you need that help no matter how much knowledge you have. Like I said, even as like a therapist, you need someone else who can help guide you through that.
Yeah, because it's so hard to parse out this idea that like someone in your life might have hurt you and they offered you something positive, or someone in your life was this really positive force and they offered you some kind of negative messaging, right? Like Gandalf is wonderful. And he kept a big secret, and sometimes he just disappears, and that's fucking problematic.
Yeah, the Dumbledore of it all.
Right, the Dumbledore of it all. And Bilbo, right? He writes these beautiful narratives that only include the stuff that he wants Frodo to take from him. And kind of problematic, right? So there's some stuff we can take from folks, and it can be hard for people to reckon with this idea of like, okay, this person hurt me, but I love them and there are these things I want to carry forward. Or this person is this beautiful shining light in my life and they did some fucked up stuff and I need to reckon with that too.
As we're talking about them being individuated, it also makes me think about how Samwise is so connected to being a gardener, that is something that's very positive for him. That is something that is also very helpful on the trip, as he's, as we can see, he's grabbing different herbs and things, and how Frodo was still kind of looking for his vocation in some ways. And so it makes me wonder if a part of the reason why Samwise is in a different place, and also, yes, Frodo has the ring, I know that, but I wonder if a part of the reason why Samwise is able to get to this place is because he already felt very connected to his values and very connected to the life that he was living. And I wonder if a part of the reason why he's able to be this light for Frodo, that without that, the film would have ended. The end, like, we wouldn't have gotten anything else. And
Frodo
just
lives in a cave with the ring. The end.
Exactly. Like his uncle did. And so just, it's just interesting because I feel like we also find that characteristic when we talk about people who are resilient for whatever reason. I feel like that is a part of the way we can look at the differences between the two of them and how their experiences and being connected to values and how important things are for Samwise really is the pushing motive of hope, and that beautiful speech that he gives in this film, which is I love that speech so much. The amount of times that I have snapped that whole speech and sent it to people who've already seen the movie and been like, I love this fucking speech so much. And I love how much because he's able to carry so much hope, because he has so much belief in the world for himself, because he has experienced being connected to the world and being connected to himself and really believing that he's doing what he was meant to do.
Which is, it's amazing how powerful that is, and how these words and the way that they were written and delivered carry that meaning for so many people ever since this book first came out. And it makes me think of when I was in my existential therapy class, the professor made us watch a clip from a movie that did not do very well overall, which is I Heart Huckabees.
I knew that's what you were going to say. I knew it was that one. Go ahead.
What a weird choice.
It is, but it's also not, because the whole metaphysical conversation with Dustin Hoffman on the blanket theory, where he's trying to help the other guy understand that the kid that he's investigating, that's going, hey, what you need to understand is that everything is the same and everything is connected. And it essentially proves the Shakespearean thought that things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes them so. Assigning value to things that don't necessarily have value outside of their context is an important thing to recognize as you go through this individuation or differentiation process, that you have to change your relationship to these things in order to understand. The most powerful line of that ties in is that everything you could ever want to be or ever have, you already have and are. And
It's very Buddhist.
It is. It is. All metaphysics and existentialism is all very Eastern philosophy and not Western in the slightest. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps horseshit that we adhere to so strongly.
Well, there's a similar quote that I actually wrote down, one of the few quotes I wrote down, which is Samwise says something along the lines of like, we should be back, like none of this would have happened. Da, 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 da. And Frodo says Gandalf didn't mean for a lot to things to happen, and they did. End of story.
Right. And like understanding that for going through anything like this, that it's going to affect every single person equally and differently at the same time. And that every person is going to have their own journey through it. And that every person is going to have to both find connection to their values and what's going to drive them to find meaning in their suffering, but also that they must look inward and find their resources to solve it in the way the situation requires. And I find that to be such a powerful way that this story shows essentially people breaking out as siblings, experiencing the world away from their parents and learning those things.
All right. Anything else on this topic before we move on? Okay,
Nope.
We'll take another break here. All right. So the last thing we wanted to hit is basically the character of Gollum. He's a big part of this movie. He gets a lot of face time, if you will, in this part of the trilogy. And so I know we had a few topics we want to touch upon, but I guess we can start with the first, which is IFS, or Integrated Family Systems, which I think we've covered here. Internal. God, I'll do that every time. Internal family systems. You know what's so funny about this? I'm seeing an internal family systems therapist right now, and I still couldn't say that correctly. But anyway, so I will throw it to you, Justine, because I know this was the topic that came to mind for you when talking about Gollum.
Yeah. So I've gone through 3 levels of internal family systems training, which means nothing other than I've given a lot of money to a man named Dick Schwartz.
You've given a lot of money. People don't realize it's it's so expensive to get trained in specific things.
It's very expensive to specialize.
And IFS takes a year.
For level 1. Anyway. People at home, if you aren't familiar with internal family systems, it's just the idea that we humans do not have a unitary mind. We contain multiverses. Or like Walt Whitman said, we contain multitudes. We couldn't say that in our first book because we would have owed money to the Walt Whitman estate.
Oh my gosh.
So we came up with we contain multiverses. I know. Yeah. Walt Whitman estate is like, you want to use a quote? Give me some of that Dick Schwartz money.
Still?
Yeah,
Wow.
still.
Wow.
But we all experience this on the day-to-day, right? Like when you get invited to go out to coffee with someone, you immediately have multiple thoughts about it. You've got a part of you that's like, yes, I totally want to go have coffee with this person. And then you have this other part of you that comes in and is like, do we have time to do that? Don't we have other stuff to do? Oh no. And you have another part that comes in and is like, why are they inviting me? Do they have some kind of ulterior motive? Are they going to ask me for money? And then maybe you have this other part that comes in and is like, outside, COVID, right? And with this one request of, do you want to go to coffee? You could have 12 different parts of you involved in weighing in on that decision. And that is normal and healthy, and we all experience that. And when we've had some trauma, sometimes those parts get to be a little bit louder or a little bit more wanting to grab the wheel of our life rather than checking in with, this is in IFS, I know this is not everyone's belief system, but that there is a grounded capital S self that we all have. That's kind of like the conductor of the parts orchestra. And so when you get a whole lot of tuba playing, which is the part that's like, COVID, 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 self comes in and is like, hey, tuba, what's happening, buddy? you're being kind of loud. What's going on? And Tuba's like, I'm scared of COVID. Like, okay, yeah, man, I hear you. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you need. And if you don't have that capital S self, Tuba's just screaming at the violins, and the violins are like, I don't know what to do. And everything's just really discordant. And I see this happening with Smeagol turned Gollum, because Gollum's been through a trauma. Mm-hmm. He's had an evil power in his head, and he's been alone in a cave for 500 years with all the parts talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes parts of us can think, and this is getting a little bit deep and existential into IFS, so friends at home, if you don't follow this, that's okay. Sometimes we look for that capital S self in other people. Mm-hmm. Or, yep. Hey, you seem like you have your shit together. Could you be myself? Like, mm-hmm. Hey, Dark mm-hmm. Lord, could you be myself?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right.
We've seen a lot of that lately, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
Sure the fuck have.
And you're right.
Dear
in that,
Orange Man.
Yeah. And it makes sense then why he grabbed so strongly to Frodo, who he was going after 5 mm-hmm. minutes ago. And now he's calling him Master, and mm-hmm. he's arguing with himself about Master knows best, and Master believes us, and we can trust Master, and mm-hmm. and really wanting Frodo to be that self for him.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's kind of like there's that children's story, Are You My Missing Piece? Are you my missing piece? Are you my missing piece? Like, are you myself? Are you myself? Mm-hmm. And Sauron's happy to be like, yeah, I'm yourself. And mm-hmm. and Frodo doesn't know that's what Gollum's doing. He's just like, oh, look, this pitiful creature. I'll help him. But if we don't turn it back around and say, hey, actually, those parts need you, mm-hmm. they'll just keep grasping. And that you're all right on. That's how we get cults. Because the guru's like, I am yourself, and I'm mm-hmm. going to tell you what to do.
And what you think. Yeah. And when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you.
Mm-hmm. That's why there was a podcast I used to listen to called Zealot. It's done now. They don't have any new episodes, mm-hmm. but one of their jingles they would play was when disenfranchised youth finally came into the picture. Because you're right. Like, it is, needing someone, because that's what, Smeagol is. He's mm-hmm. like, he's someone who is disenfranchised, who does not have exactly what I'm just repeating you, but yeah, he's rife for being taken up, and unfortunately he's still kind of on his own, mm-hmm. Because you're right, Frodo doesn't understand the part he's playing for him, and so he's still kind of left to his own devices of figuring it out until finally that part of him that isn't the best one, mm-hmm. For him, the more self-destructive part starts taking them to danger at the end.
Right. Because tuba will always win versus the violin.
Because it's most distressed. It's the squeaky wheel. Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the most freaked out part of you, mm-hmm. if you don't know what to do with it, will win, because how could it not? You're scared.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I love that you came in hot with that, Justine, and that you happen to be IFS trained. I am not IFS trained, but I am trained in structural dissociation, which is a cousin of
mm-hmm.
IFS.
It's all parts work.
Right. It's all ego state. It's all the same shit.
And it's all Buddhism again.
Right. I mean, I think what I would love for clients and budding therapists to understand is, as much as places offer you credentials and training and knowledge that do crack your head open and give you the ability to help people and yourself help mm-hmm. people, is watch the dogmatism in these treatments, because even the people who create them will later go on and talk about how somebody else's model influenced theirs in their life, and that what they are doing is running a business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they are preaching their thing because they've researched it and standardized it and manualized it through their viewpoint in order to make a business. And understanding that is important, that these are all ways of saying the same things, but you may need to hear it in a different way. And that's the value of there being a different voice saying it. But mm-hmm. speaking of different voices, what I love about the way structural dissociation puts things is understanding that these parts that Justine is talking about all exist for a reason. Every one of them evolved in response to an event or series of events that happened. And Janina Fisher, who did one of the trainings that I took and very much adored this viewpoint, is understanding that the more trauma occurs, the more splitting is required. So the more parts have to develop. And while we see primarily two parts of Gollum and Smeagol that interact, probably for simplicity purposes, right, is what you see is that in all of us, there are several different parts that evolve that are parts of our personality that are functions. Like our personality operates like a phone or Windows. You can have the base operating system that all runs the same, and then you install different apps based on what you need to do specific things that might turn off or on other functions that exist within that operating system. And Gollum is the survival part of Smeagol. Gollum can do things that Smeagol cannot. Gollum exists to murder, cheat, steal, and do whatever is necessary to keep that ring in his possession, keep it hidden from Sauron, and eat and survive. That's it. That's all that's for. It's the id personified, basically. Because even parts goes back to Freud. Id, ego, superego. Guess what? Part. And understanding that we can lose connection with the self when we're thrust into situations we must survive. And Gollum's been doing it for 500 years, where he has lost the connection to who Smeagol is. And the scenes where Frodo being kind to him and asking him what his name is shows such beautiful acting by Andy Serkis. Even though it got digitally represented, you see just this emergence of Smeagol again for the first time in so long. And I have seen that with clients a great many times. In Richard Schwartz's language, it's getting the self online, which is a huge focus of things that he works on with clients. But for a therapist, being able to help someone recognize that you have ceded control of yourself over to these parts. And when they take over, because they evolved out of necessity to survive, they have limited functions that correspond only to the situations they evolved from. And they can get stuck.
Well, they're trying to help, but they're not very skillful.
Right. They're not. And the parts might get stuck at a developmental stage different than you are at now. Like there could be a trauma you went through at 8 years old, and that part continues to have an 8-year-old mindset. And you as an adult recognizing I'm acting like a child right now, and I can't figure out why, could be because of a part. And that part having formed then. And understanding that is really important, understanding this beautiful interaction we see between Smeagol and Gollum, where Smeagol is doing what we would coach, or what a therapist who understands these models would coach a client to do is, it's okay to tell your fight part, you don't need it anymore. That right now, I don't need you. You usually want to do that with a more compassionate voice because that part does exist for a reason and it knows it.
Yeah.
And the way Gollum talks to Smeagol of, you'd be nothing without me. Like, you see that.
Well,
That was a little bit Yoda.
It was. It was. I'll give it that. I wasn't quite prepared to do it, and then I decided to go for it, and I absolutely failed, so I'll just own that.
No, it's all right.
Maybe I'll...
well, in
I'll
one
let
of...
Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
Go ahead, Ben. No, you finish. What you're
just
say.
wanted to point out like that argument. You usually want to be more compassionate with yourself because your parts, because the parts evolved and succeeded because you're still here. So they know that their existence is valid and purposeful, but you need your core self, or as I like to call it, your president, to tell your Secretary of Defense that, hey, I'm aware that if we nuke them, they're no longer a problem. I am aware that that is an option. But if we nuke them, we're going to have more problems. And actually, we need to solve this with diplomacy right now, not nukes, okay?
Well, and one of the ways that I talk about it with clients, or a way that I actually use for myself, is thanking the fighting part for doing such a good job of getting us to where we are right now. And that I'm really grateful for all the help that they've given, and that right now I'm actually okay. And I don't need their help right now, but that I'm really grateful that they stood up and wanted to be a part of this.
Yeah, I tell clients a lot that I said, this part of you is like your friend who is really scrappy and always wants to fight. And they're like still your best friend, though, or one of your best friends. And then you have to tell, like, I understand the sentiment, and you're going to add stress to me now, because now it's like we're going to have a fight at a public park and you're adding more to the drama than you're helping. Tell them they can put their earrings back in, and, you know, that like that's not the energy right now. Because I think unfortunately, the sort of mainstream concept, because we're just, I don't know, we're all so mean to ourselves and each other, is to like dogpile on ourselves in those moments. Like the amount of times. And we see it with Smeagol in the movie when I'm with clients and they're like, yeah, I had this thought pop up and I was like, come on, you know that's not true. Why are you acting like this? And like being mean to themselves. And I'm like, okay, so we dogpiled. Did that help us feel better? Did that help us feel worse? Are we just adding to the mean voices in our head that already tell us we're trash monsters or whatever? And so a lot of times what I'll tell clients too as well is and this goes back to the idea that different parts of us are younger or at different ages, is like, how would you have wanted an adult to have talked to you when you were young? And how would you have wanted to be comforted at these different ages? And you can give that to yourself. And that question like will make someone cry like that. Yeah. And when you ask them that question, but I think it helps us conceptualize that we still need the same amount of responses and comfort internally that we did when we were young. And I think it really helps adults think differently about how they're approaching themselves.
It does. And especially if you tie that into where they feel it in their body, so they can release. And people spend so much time rejecting emotions as weakness, but I try so very hard to help them understand that trapped emotions make you weaker. Expressing them makes you stronger, because it helps you connect to the meaning you were supposed to get from that feeling in the first place that got stuck because it wasn't allowed to come out at that time.
I could go on a 5-hour rant about how you're not better as an adult because you're logical and you're so pragmatic that you're better than everybody else. The scam that we've sold ourselves as adults is that if you're truly mature, then you shouldn't be having feelings anymore. And if you're having emotions, then something is still childish and immature about you, and that you've truly reached, I don't know, the zenith of your truest form if you can like always apply logic and you never get emotional and ... And that's such a disservice we do ourselves and each other in this mythology that like feelings are stupid and immature and young and, you know, dummy stuff. And it's not. And I always feel like I'm constantly having to break it to clients that your emotions are there, buddy, and they're just as worthwhile as logic parts of you. And you're not better because you are so pragmatic. And actually, pragmatism can get in the way of actually feeling better and quote unquote winning at therapy. Because I feel like the people that are most pragmatic inclined also come into therapy with a very like, I'm gonna win at therapy energy. And like, so you have to like kind of get through all these walls.
My competitive part enjoys the process of helping them realize that is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Questioning social constructs. It's one of my favorite pastimes. And Spock parts aren't better than Kirk parts.
That's true. What's so interesting about hearing you guys talk about this is that what I took away from the Gollum, Smeagol, Samwise, Frodo, all that collaboration in the movie was I viewed it like such a typical child therapist who has to do like a lot of like parenting and family work as part of being a child therapist. And that's the total zone that I viewed it as, where what came up for me is honestly like the only times I ever feel disappointed with Sam, where he is just truly vilifying Smeagol. I feel like I want to call him Smeagol now because I have a little more affection for him, and calling him Gollum feels mean. But
see, you found compassion. We just have to find a point of compassion.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
And so I think what really like felt, oof, Sam, come on, is when Frodo does take Smeagol under their wing and is calling him Smeagol and is giving him things to be proud of. and really trying to meet him where he's at. And Sam keeps going, he's such a bad person, or he's not even a person. He's a thief and a liar, and he's intentionally evil and full of bad intentions. And how can we trust him? He's garbage monster person. And Frodo is like, basically says, I wrote it a lot down. Basically, like the summation, it's to me was, you don't get it, and you're not going to get it because you don't know what it's like to go through what he's gone through and now what I'm going through. And I see this a lot when I do family work, where I know I put it when I was introducing the topics under sort of the form of like addiction, but honestly, it's any sort of like mental health, which, you know, addiction can be part of that analogy, which is that if you've never gone through significant mental health issues or addiction issues, or you've never been close to someone who's gone through that stuff, you can really struggle to understand how they don't have more autonomy over it. And there can be a lot of vilification in the form of how Sam's viewing it, which is like, well, he's choosing to act this way and he's choosing to be a bad person. And because I'm making that decision that he's choosing to be that way, he's an untrustworthy person. It's all behavioral, and he has every say in the matter. And what Frodo's understanding is more of the voice that can come in family work of maybe another parent or someone else, or sometimes me, which is, that's not the long and the short of it. And when you've gone through hard things in life, like I'm going through that, like he went through, it has an impact on you, the choices you made. He's not a bad person. He's just had bad stuff happen to him, and he's struggling. And if we can give him some modicum of respect, that he can make it out the other side, and we can help him feel better, get better, if you will. And that's such a huge battle. I think maybe I'm thinking of it like addiction, because I think that's how I see it a lot, like on Facebook and stuff like that, where people are like, how could you choose drugs over your kids? And how could you, like, really vilifying people that struggle with addiction specifically, but it can go mental health at large. And we really are still struggling in mainstream society to hold compassion and empathy in this arena. And I know my assumption is it's coming from a place of, I can't accept the idea that there might be things that we don't have control over. So I have to tell myself that you're choosing to do drugs, you're choosing to be depressed, you're choosing this, choosing that, because then it allows me the comfort of thinking, well, I'm not choosing those things, so that can't happen to me. And what Frodo's trying to explain to Samwise is, sometimes shit happens to you and it changes you and it sucks and it's scary. And like, you have got to have more empathy for this dude, because we are two bad decisions, two life events away from being Smeagol, from being Gollum. And that's such an important lesson. And that's really what I saw. And I think it is beautiful how, as soon as, I keep wanting to say Elijah Wood, as soon as Frodo starts showing him respect, he takes it up. And I think that happens more than people realize. As soon as someone is given dignity, they will respond in kind for that, and they will start to grow. We can't dehumanize people and then think that they're just going to rise above that dehumanization. That is trauma over and over again when we get to the point of dehumanization. And to think that people can like rise above that just on their own will is so unkind and compassionate. And I think it is just a good lesson of, if you give someone space and forgiveness sometimes too, that within, limits, boundaries, whatever, that's when they can truly start to quote unquote become themselves again, or get to the other side of the situation. And I think it's just really hard, unless you've been a part of it or you're part of like mental health community like we are. It's really hard to wrap your head around that at first, but you can get there if you allow yourself, your mind to be cracked open a little bit by somebody else about this concept. But it's really hard. It's really, really hard.
It's really hard to overcome being relegated to villainhood. Mm-hmm. And the short and simple example I'll give of that is when there's suspicion in a relationship that someone is cheating, especially when it's not actually happening, and that's somebody else's past trauma playing out on their current partner. And they keep accusing them of cheating and accusing them of cheating and accusing them of cheating, till the person eventually goes, fuck it. If I'm going to keep getting accused of cheating, I'm going to go fucking cheat, because this shit isn't even worth it.
Might as well have the benefit of it. If I'm reaping all of the consequences.
And it's important to understand that we as a society go, okay, well, you did a bad thing or a wrong thing, or you gave in to this or whatever broken mentality we want to have about something, and then say, let me shame you because you weren't able to get better, but also I'm going to make it as hard as fucking possible for you to get better by shaming you to a point that you feel that it's hopeless, and then your part system will take hold of that and say, hey, we don't need any of that shit. Fuck it. Let's just dissociate and go to something that makes us feel good.
The path of least resistance, yeah.
Or just a part that helps them survive because they can unplug. Because there is no path to success. And when our body recognizes that and chooses that for ourselves, doesn't have to be true, but when the perception of that is there, our body will start choosing from our freeze and fawn responses, and our ability to fight or run away from what's causing that will cease to be a viable option, and our body will choose the numb out options to escape pain.
Yeah, because one thing I always try to emphasize too to people when they're stuck in this, it's a choice they're making, they're deciding to be a jerk or they're just an asshole or, whatever, is I do try to tell people everybody's just trying to get their needs met. No one's ever just like, I'm deciding today I'm going to blow up somebody's life or I'm going to be a total D-bag. Maybe someone is. I don't know, but
very rarely.
Very rarely. And more often than not, especially with younger people, but this is all ages, they're trying to get a need met and they're just going about it in a way that is unhealthy or is causing more strife or instant gratification, but long-term consequences. And that's a way to have like compassion. And like you were saying, Ben, is like recognizing that they're trying to deal with something and you're just seeing like the behavior part of it or the consequences part. And and I think too, we have to be careful about how much we reinforce as supports. We reinforce the thought patterns that are already going on inside. Like when he starts saying, nobody likes you. Of course, nobody likes you. Everybody hates you. You're a piece of shit. All the stuff that Smeagol was saying to himself behind that tree, like towards the end and throughout. And going back to dogpiling is what I tell people in their life. Like we have to be careful of the messaging we give out, because if we're just reinforcing that, then why wouldn't they just go down that road? Like you were saying, Ben, like why wouldn't they just succumb to that thought process? Because you're fertilizing their belief system that they're bad or whatever it is anyway. And
or that the world's bad.
Yeah. Just hopelessness in general, hopelessness, helplessness, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I want to say about it is recognizing the way that this is written and shown is so important, because like Justine, you were talking about when the self is ascribed to someone else, it is weak because it's not real. You're placing impossible tasks and standards on another person to be your regulator and your basis. And that doesn't work, because things that are alive are fallible. They are not perfect, and they are susceptible to life happening to them too and being put in impossible situations. And we see that dynamic play out when Faramir forces Frodo's hand that either he's going to have his men shoot Gollum in the pool for, I think, a made-up rule. And I don't think that's actually a forbidden pool. I think that's some bullshit.
Just a pool.
Right.
It's just a fucking pool in the woods.
He decided to use his leverage in order to manipulate the situation and put Frodo in an impossible situation where he had to choose. But because Gollum's self is placed on Frodo when Frodo is imperfect, or Smeagol's ability to be himself is placed just on one person, when that person fails him, it opens the door for Gollum to come back in and say, I told you so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Gollum seizes control again. He never fully seizes control until the end, but Smeagol never gets back in control of that body fully.
My retention of these movies is so low that I was genuinely like, oh my God, what's going to happen now with Smeagol? Because I could not remember.
He's going to lead him to a giant spider.
Don't
because
spoil it for me.
What happens next?
I don't remember.
The third one's my favorite, so I hope you'll have me back.
Okay. All right. Well, after this,
Yes.
let's take another break and then we will slip into treatment. All right. Treatment. I can just go first because I stole my own answer, which is that I kind of talked about it already in this last section, which is that, we like to make these funny made up scenarios in our head. So if, let's say, Samwise and Frodo were to adopt Smeagol and take them home with him to the Shire, he wouldn't automatically get better. Like, people like to think that, oh, if I take someone out of their current situation and give them XYZ, love, comfort, security, like shelter, that they're just gonna get better and be so grateful and just everything's gonna be copacetic. And then it doesn't. And then you're in my office crying. And so what I typically do, like what I've already sort of talked about, is just a lot of psychoeducation. This can be the kind of work where I would probably see Samwise and Frodo without Smeagol involved. Sometimes when you do family work, sometimes I'll do family work without if I'm going to put him in the kid role, without the kid involved, because one, they don't need to be there as I'm talking about them in front of them, because a lot of psychoeducation is talking about what's going on and saying, like, this is probably why they're doing this is probably why they're doing that, and you don't necessarily want to do that in front of the person because it can be very othering and if nothing else, boring, especially if you're working with actual kid-aged kids. It's just freaking boring. And so that would be the kind of work, is more like coaching is what I call it, where I work with just like the parents in the situation. And I think Sam, God love him, I think would just need a lot of psychoeducation, and Frodo would probably help me out from an anecdotal perspective when we work together about, like, this is what it's going to look like. This are like the trials and tribulations when you decide to take care of someone who has a long history of trauma, abuse, neglect, yada, yada, like Smeagol clearly does, and to have realistic expectations about how they'll progress in your care, and that when they do things, it's not a choice they're necessarily making. You know, they're trying to they're trying to manage a lot of internal struggle, a lot of coping skills that worked for them up to a point, and they're acclimating to a new environment, and also having to continuously decide if they can trust you and the situation they're in. And you have to be patient with that, and you have to practice a lot of radical compassion and empathy, while also setting limits like any good parent would. And so that's kind of where I would go with them. I think Sam would need somebody, you know, to really kind of sit his ass down every once in a while and be like, this is one arena where you kind of don't know what you're talking about, and your goodness and the simplistic view you have of the world is not serving you. And I need you to think a bit more out of the box and sit in the discomfort of that. And even if you don't like understand it, try your best to understand it from a educational academic point of view if you can't get it internally. But that's where I would go with treatment.
Can you treat all the boomers?
Can I?
Can you just personally, can you just treat all of them so that we can work on the understanding that the world they continue to vote for and values they continue to adhere to might need to go through exactly that experience?
I would love, we'd really have to think about how that would go about, if it'd be a long line of boomers that would go into my office one at a time, or if it'd be sort of like a stadium situation, like an arena situation, which I think that might not work. I think they'd need one-on-one.
Well, and here's what I'm going to say, which is something I always point out. I don't think the boomers are going to come into your office, so I don't think you're going to have to worry about it. Go ahead, Brittany.
I wish they would. And sometimes they do, because I think it's in the situation that Sam is in, which is that now it's at my front door and now it's causing strife in my life. And so it's usually almost like a bait and switch when I do this kind of work, which they come in where they're like, Smeagol's the problem. They don't necessarily say it like that, because in the parent-child dynamic I'm talking about, they like love their children, but they're like, this kid's the problem. The amount of times I've had a family come in where they're like, my goal is for my kid to mind me. And you're going to help them mind me. And then I have to do a little bait and switch on them. And I'm like, actually, we're going to talk about what you can do differently. And then hopefully your kid will follow suit.
Me?
Your kid will follow suit, or maybe they won't. And, you know, in this one-to-one comparison to adoption, what I tell parents who do that work is you have to be, what I really want people to understand, and if you're listening, everybody open up your listening ears, is that when you choose to adopt a child or take a person into your home that has a hard history or maybe an unknown history, that you have to be ready for whatever that looks like. And sometimes it looks like this, which is that it's not about behavior, it's a whole nother story. And so, yeah, that's why I'll go with that. I'll just stop there. But anyway, who would like to talk about treatment next?
Mine's going to be a real downer. Should I go in the middle?
You can go now.
So that
Go for it.
Yeah, well, go ahead and go.
so that there's time to like bring it back up.
Yeah.
So
I'll be your Samwise.
great. That's perfect. So I want to work with Merry and Pippin. And the reason I want to work with Merry and Pippin is because they just had this really big realization that the world is going to end. And they just had a big win where they helped. And then they're like, oh, cool, everything's fine. Let's go smoke some South Farling weed. And they're about to go into existential crises about, well, what do I do now? And this is so common to the folks that I see in my office. I work with a lot of folks that are struggling with nihilism and existential dread because I work with a lot of folks that come out of cultic environments who have completely pushed away the idea of spirituality or faith. And so even the language of believing in something, even if that is yourself, is very hard. And folks who are really woke and tuned into what's happening in the world around them, up to and including the fact that the earth is really unwell. And so a lot of the work that I do with them and that I would want to do with Merry and Pippin is get curious about how we're finding meaning when we feel so nihilistic or when we are shut down with this existential dread. And I am going to take us to a different fandom for a minute because this is what I would do with my clients. And this is an example from the book, The Grieving Therapist, Caring for Yourself and Your Clients When It Feels Like the End of the World. Imagine, if you will, the Titanic. The historical Titanic, not that James Cameron fan fiction. It took different folks on the ship different amounts of time to accept what was happening. Some people didn't believe it till the last possible second. Some people knew right away. But at some point, we can all look around and go, this ship's going down and we have about 2 hours. And so my question for clients is, we know that the earth is unwell. We also know that mortal life is finite. And so you only get this one life that we know of. If we equate that one life to the 2 hours on the Titanic, how do you want to show up? How are you going to make meaning with the final 2 hours of your life? Are you going to be someone who helps other people into boats? Are you going to be a helper? Are you going to be throwing people off the side of the ship to get a spot in a lifeboat? Are you going to be cuddling with your loved one as the water rises? Or do you want to be like the band who played together on the deck until they couldn't play anymore? And I don't get to tell you what the answer is, but for me, I'd want to be in the band. I want to do what I love for me. It benefits others. And that's how I want to spend my life. And so clients and I have really good conversations about this. And believe it or not, it can be a really fruitful conversation where folks have to think and reckon with mortality, which isn't easy. And I don't think it would be easy for Merry and Pippin. They've probably never thought about the fact that they will one day no longer be with us. And what do they want to do? Are they making enough meaning smoking weed and eating snacks? Maybe, but it seems like now that they've, spent time with Treebeard and the Fellowship and, helped save the world, that maybe there is something else out there they want to do or be. And there can still be room for them to smoke weed and have snacks in addition to this other work.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
Thank you.
Love it. And for the record, I want to be the chef, the guy who was throwing the furniture overboard and then goes to cling to the back of the ship, and he survived partially because he had drank enough alcohol that his blood temperature lowered, but he radically accepted what was going on.
We still don't quite know how that dude survived, Because that alcohol should have made him more susceptible to frostbite.
Right, should have. But that dude was real and he lived.
I know. I'm a bit of a Titanic scholar myself, Ben.
I figured.
Mm-hmm.
Based on you calling the movie fan fiction.
You just didn't go through that one weird phase when you were 12 like I did, where you read A Night to Remember, whatever it's called, because you were so deeply into Titanic because of Leonardo DiCaprio. Nobody else.
I'm a little bit older than you.
Okay. I think I was, 6th grade when Titanic came out.
I was born in the 70s.
All right, so Titanic stuff aside, which could be its own episode, and probably should be given its status in movie history. Hannah, do you want to go next or you want me to?
Oh, I can go next.
Okay.
I'll go next. So something that I was thinking about while we were recording today is that part of what I help clients do, especially when they're trying to deal with some of the negative narratives that they hold, usually based on experiences that they've had. We all have to start some kind of narrative in order to continue to live our life. And one thing that I try to do that just has to do just with the language of how we talk to ourselves or how we find hope or are able to find a way to kind of connect back to the self that we were discussing earlier. And one of the ways that I do that is we hear a lot of shit about affirmations. And some people really throw them out the window as like they have to be really positive, that it has to be this huge idea of how everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be okay. And how what I've really found when I work with people is that, and something that I use a lot for myself, is having and being able to shift and change an affirmation based on what you can actually believe. So it's not necessarily dissimilar from values work or from finding meaning as much as it is when we have these narratives, usually there's about 10 or so negative thoughts, negative cognitions that go along with that. I'm bad, I'm too much, I'm unlovable. So a part of what I try to do is let's find something that feels meaningful and helpful when that negative narrative pops up for you. And a lot of the time, what I'm talking about is using something that resonates with you, something such as, I am learning how to take good care of myself. I am learning to accept that I will have good days. I will have good days and hard days. I am learning more about my story. And there are a lot of different parts. Kind of anything, the way that I talk about it with people is we have to have something that's neutral. We can't go from I'm unlovable to I'm lovable because that doesn't feel realistic. It's kind of going back to the idea of the hope that we see Samwise have and how important it is to find some meaning or some hope for yourself. And that sometimes we have to use various wording to kind of get us there. And so that is something that I would want to do really with anybody. I mean, it kind of makes me think of, initially I was thinking for treatment to have all of the people that survived the end of the fellowship and everything happening and have them kind of be in a group setting. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought that what would really be helpful is having a couple of different ways to help them slowly acclimate back into the world. And sometimes that comes with having a way that we think about it for ourselves. And so that's how I use affirmations with clients. I tell them, we can't have something that's like very black and white. We have to have something, we have to be able to live in the gray and be able to find something that can help us just in those moments when the negative narrative is popping up or those other parts of us are screaming instead of sitting down and being able to gently talk with us. And some of those ways really is having your own wording for yourself that you believe. I also use a set of emotional rights with my clients. That is so old that I can barely, what is the word? It's hard to cite because it's so old. And what's really interesting about when I give these people these emotional rights, I talk about how these might not all feel true for you, and that's okay. And if they seem helpful, but they don't really connect, we can go over it and change any of the words that don't feel like they fit for you, so that we can kind of meet you where you are, to kind of help you believe this idea, especially when I work with people who've experienced a lot of trauma, and anything like, I am allowed to ask for what I need, even if the answer is no. And sometimes those things don't feel true. So that's another one of those ways where I kind of talk about, okay, what feels like it would work for you? Because right now you're not there, and that's okay. That's a part of why you're seeing me. And so that's kind of a part of the way that I use language, or I use different kinds of affirmations and different ways to help people be able to look at themselves and just use something in the moment in order to help neutralize the negative cognitions or negative thoughts. So I would kind of use that with anybody that we've been talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. That's all very important stuff, especially when people are dealing with such intensely traumatic situations. To be able to provide themselves some reassurance through affirmation is huge. For me, looking at this, we've covered a lot of characters so well, and some we've just completely left out. So I feel like I want to kind of highlight some of the characters we haven't talked about much, because I know some fans are like, what about Aragorn? What about Gimli? What about Legolas? We haven't talked about any of them. And largely because Gimli and Legolas in this film are almost commic relief.
Mm-hmm.
For
Gimli was cracking me up. That little maniac.
Yeah.
Well, because John Rhys Davies got to do all his dramatic stuff as Treebeard, so he didn't have to do it as Gimli in this one. But I think I want to cover is when people go through traumatic situations, particularly people that have to be combatants in them, when you talk about things with them, it's important in the way they tell the story. So our trauma narratives. And Justine, hopefully this can resonate with you as someone who's written a fanfic book about how to essentially use narrative therapy to retell your life. It was just sitting right in the corner by her.
I was motioning to my book for friends at home.
But the power of how the story is told is important, because as we've highlighted, your parts will pile on you and create shame and guilt that keep the bad feelings stuck. And they keep you replaying the moments where you failed over and over again. And those can prevent you from developing spontaneous access to the flow state that helps you connect to your ability to use your skills and be so invested in the moment that you're just operating exactly at peak performance. And we see Legolas as a perfect example of that in this film. There are so many moments where Legolas, and I know he's an elf and he's a perfect being and all of those things, but he spontaneously generates solutions that could not possibly have been pre-thought of.
When he skateboards down that staircase.
People were
Exactly
so
that.
mad about that. You have no idea.
It's amazing.
But
X Games mode.
Right. It so perfectly represents the exact kind of things that sometimes spontaneously occur to us in the moment when we're able to attune to the situation and give ourselves credit for what we can do and don't bother listening to our negative voice that tells us what you can't. And sometimes you have to get there. And helping people sometimes process, they can't always do that. You can't always be in flow state. And sometimes you have been successful doing that in the past and couldn't find it in a moment, particularly in the chaos of battle. I work with police officers a lot. I have to help people debrief from all manner of fucked up stuff. And they have this part of them that has been able to access flow and do crazy shit that they never thought of. And soldiers are no different. And therapists can come up with solutions in a moment that you forget immediately. And it was the exact perfect thing to say, but you can't repeat it. And helping people understand that in these moments where you faced immense pressure and immense terror, that there are things that you did right that you get to integrate into your story. And you have to balance what didn't go right that your parts are piling on yourself with and telling you how much you suck or how much you failed or what you couldn't do with the things that you did do well, in order to process all of it together from that neutral point that Hannah's talking about. Because as we look to ascribe meaning to terrible situations that we've been through or good ones, we have to when we're done with the emotions that have been stuck, we reach a point of neutrality with it that helps us reach an objective point of, okay, this didn't go so well, but this did. And it helps you recognize what you can learn from, both good and bad, because we learn from both. We learn as much from failure as we do from success, sometimes more. But you can't do it if you continue to hold on to the negative narrative that you suck because you didn't do it perfect. But if you can look at it from a balanced viewpoint of, I did this well and I didn't do this well, you can find a way to succeed. And I think Aragorn is really good at that. Aragorn recognizes what he's done well and what he hasn't done well. But one of the scenes that got cut was him explaining to Éowyn that he's 87 years old.
See, it explains stuff, Brittany.
And he's so hot. He's so hot.
He's so hot.
He's in that flow state for sure. Flow state, daddy.
But
He gets more
stays
scenes.
there. Right, he gets more scenes, and so does Éowyn. But the importance of that is just recognizing that when someone can be integrated with all the things they've ever learned, all the successes and the failures, they can embrace that even if something goes against your core values, such as nobody tosses a dwarf, that at some point you must be able to spontaneously let that go, accept that that's a limitation, and the exact thing you need to do is abandon your shame and preconceived notions about a situation and open your mind to out-of-the-box solutions that can be applied right now.
And let yourself get absolutely yeeted into a crowd of orcs.
Urukai. I was like, are you going to do it or am I going to do it?
Right? I was almost not like, Urukai and orcs, not the same.
Anyway.
I sent you a snap about that today while you were watching it.
And I decided I didn't want to know. I was like, you know what? If you're going to think of it like the mind palace, like Sherlock Holmes likes to talk about, I don't need to evacuate anything from my mind so that Urukai or whatever can live there. I'm good. So we can, anything else before we slide into final thoughts, Ben?
Nope.
All right. Well, one more break. Final thoughts. I'll go first because I'm the bummer of this part. I'm not as much of a bummer this time around, guys. As if you listen to our fellowship episode, you know that I was like really dogging on it that for whatever reason, I can't retain anything from when I watch these movies. And this time I was really trying to come at it with a different energy, especially after I saw that 2 hours, 59 minutes. And I will say I was still kind of like wah, 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 wah for most of it. But then by the time the battle scene came up, I was like fully in. I don't know if it's because I'm like knee deep in House of Dragon right now, but I was like really into the battle scene when those ladders came up and the orcs started going with battles or whatever you guys call them. I was like, oh, this is crazy. When they blew up that part of that wall, I was like, this is dope. Like I was fully into it. So by the end, it had me. You know, I know eventually we're going to have to watch the next one next season, so I'll be into it. And so I'll say that. The wig games, they're awesome wigs. Wig game is very strong in this movie series and, you know, beautiful wigs. So that's my final thoughts. Justine, do you want to go next?
All right. So this is my final thought about this film.
Yes. Just kind of any opinion you have on it. It doesn't have to be therapy. It's you as a film lover, as a Tolkien lover, as whatever lover.
Okay, so Return of the King is my favorite, but I do love Two Towers because we get all of this great hot end action. And the Rohirrim, who we did not even mention.
We did not.
So, Brittany, those are the horse people led by Carl Urban.
What? There were horse people in this movie? Like centaurs?
Not centaurs, the guys that ride horses, the horse masters.
Oh, you can't say horse people. I mean, my brain said there were half horse people in this movie? Like half horse, half men?
Stop reading Twilight.
It's not Twilight. If anything, it's Percy Jackson, which I have not read, but I'm slightly aware of.
Yes. Okay. I thought I was making it easier. I made it worse.
Welcome to Life with Brittany Brownfield.
About this specific thing.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we get to go to Rohan and see all of that interaction, and I do love a Carl Urban. He's good at all ages. He's beautiful in Xena Warrior Princess. He's beautiful here. He's beautiful in The Boys. He ages like a fine wine. And this is going to be so nerdy, but here we are. I love that Tolkien called them the Rohirrim, because I am is a plural in Hebrew. So he's saying multiple horse riders, and he's using the eam. I loved that as a linguistics nerd. And good thing you didn't invite me for Star Wars. I'd be telling you about how Yoda means to know in Hebrew. Anyway. That's just a bonus fact. So I loved it as much as I always do when I watch it. I watched the extended edition OBS. I opened up my entire afternoon. My partner was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I need to watch The Two Towers by 8:30 p.m."
Yeah, I thought all I did today was do laundry and watch this movie.
And he would come in and talk to me, and I'm like, "I can't pause."
There's no time. There's no time for you because this movie is 4 hours long.
Like Gandalf.
Yeah.
300 years among men, and I don't have enough time.
Exactly. But he's like, "You know what happens?" I'm like, "I do, but I haven't been watching with this particular mindset." And what I got from it this time that I feel like I didn't previously was just how socialist it is and how much it's shitting on capitalism. And I loved that.
Hell yeah.
I could continue talking about this in a myriad of ways for many minutes, but listeners are like, wrap it the fuck up. So I will.
All right. Who wants to go next? Hannah or Ben?
I'll go next. So I think I know all the dialogue to this film, not the extended version. I don't think, because I've definitely watched that one, but not as many times. So I love these movies. I love them. And I probably would just watch Return of the King, because I can never, last time when we did the first movie, I watched the whole trilogy, because I was like, I just need more of this. So yeah, so I love Lord of the Rings, and I love The Two Towers. I've always really enjoyed the second film, and I'll watch it a billion more times because there's just something about it, and I just love it.
I guess that leaves me to bring it home here. I have loved the Lord of the Rings universe since I first watched the cartoon version of The Hobbit as a child, and I continue to love the Lord of the Rings series. And as much of it as I can get, I will consume, because it's just so good. It's so good. And these movies were done with so much love for the material that you feel it. No expense was spared in the details of the helmets and the town, and everything about Rohan feels like you're in a Norse village. And it's just so beautifully done. And this movie in particular is among my favorites ever, because of how powerful it is and how much it speaks to the ability to start growing beyond everything that you've known and find growth and success in dire circumstances, and recognize that believing in yourself sometimes is exactly enough, and believing in yourself and your friends, more importantly. And this movie just hits so hard, and I think it will just continue to thrill audiences forever. I love it so much that I have watched all of the extended stuff, the interviews, and I feel like at this point I have to remind my friend Sarah, who I know will be listening to this, that I did in fact take your Bishwap.
And on that note, we will wrap this up, because I don't even know what you're talking about. So, Justine, where would you like people to find you if they are wanting to know more about you after listening?
Yes. Please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom. I also have a website, JustineMastin.com, where you can learn all about the stuff I do outside of the therapy office, such as mental health consulting and voiceovers. If you can't get enough of this voice, you can have it on your fill in the blank. And of course, you can find Starship Therapise using therapeutic fanfiction to rewrite your life wherever books are sold. Starship Therapise, the podcast, is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And The Grieving Therapist, caring for yourself and your clients when it feels like the end of the world, will be available for pre-sale pretty soon. I will let you know as soon as it's available.
All right, great.
And thanks for having me and letting me watch this all afternoon.
Giving you a good reason to. And thank you, of course, for joining us. I know we've been trying to get you and Larissa, R.I.P., on this podcast.
R.I.P. Brittany, Jesus.
Bringing a joke back around. Don't you guys know how comedic beats work?
Yes.
And so I'm glad we were able to finally do it. Ideally, next time we will have Larissa as well, should she come back from the spirit realm. And as always, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. You can also find us on Patreon. If you start at even just $1, you can have access early to some of our episodes and also unedited pieces of those episodes. And if you are a $50 or more patron, you could actually pick the movie we discuss for an episode. And we also have a TeePublic if you wanted to get some of our merch, a t-shirt, a mug, what have you. And as always, if you can find time to rate and review us, especially on Apple Podcasts, it's the best way for other people to find us and to get us out there to other people. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you guys next season when we finally talk about Return of the King.